Hello everyone, I'm Vitit Muntarbhorn. I teach at Chulalongkorn University Law Faculty, and I'm very pleased to be here with you to brief you on various developments which took place over 10 years ago, but which are still very relevant today to help protect LGBTI. About 15 years ago, many of us came together, academics, UN people, some government, some NGO, but in independent capacity, to try to summarize for the global community the international law on the issue of protection of LGBTI people at that point in time. And so, over 10 years ago, the Yogyakarta principles were born. That period, about 15 years ago, when we came together in Yogyakarta, Indonesia, there were many instruments on human rights pertaining to sexual orientation, gender identity, but not specific enough. For example, we had, and we still have, covenants on human rights, but they're not specifically on LGBTI people. However, what we wanted to do over 15 years ago was to come together to summarize the state of the law at that point in time and to make it easy for people to follow the various principles pertaining to protection and respect for the rights of LGBTI people. So what I'd like to introduce to you now would be the original version over 10 years ago of the Yogyakarta principles, and then also to update you on what happened just after 10 years later, when the groups came together again to refresh the process and to add a few principles and add a few comments to elaborate upon protection of LGBTI people. And that's why you have the Yogyakarta plus 10 principles, following from the original Yogyakarta principles about 15 years ago. And what I'd like to do is to enable you to go through what happened over 15 years ago, and then more recently the plus 10 update, which helped to innovate and encapsulate developments from over 10 years ago more recently. So let's go and see the Yogyakarta principles plus 10, particularly to do with LGBTI people. The first issue really is to introduce you to the terminology of all this, because it's not always easy to understand the terminology. And of course, people might even want a sort of expression that helps to define what we're talking about. So let's see what definitions we might have, just simple ones. Sexual orientation is really how we feel towards other people in terms of our sexual leanings. And it might be hetero or homo. So it's not only about gays and lesbians and so on, but it's also about anybody. And it's just very human to have sexual orientation, and it can be diverse as well as very channel oriented in terms of preference. Gender identity is about how we feel about what we are, in terms of how we affirm our feelings about ourselves towards the world, which might be different from the biological angle of what we were born as or with. In other words, this is very much linked with self-expression in terms of something not biological, but more of a social identification, social construct between ourselves and everybody else. And this is very much to do with the trans friends who also try to affirm what they are, irrespective of the biological birth, so to speak, of our friends. The third expression, which has come to the fore more recently, is gender expression, and that is really how anyone expresses oneself in terms of gender. It may be in terms of dress, or it may be mannerisms and ways of speaking and so on. So it's really something very diverse in terms of the external expression of what we are, coming from the internal sense of self as to how we would express our gender. And this is also very much linked with trans people, but it's more than that. I mean, a lot of people also want to cross-dress and express themselves differently without necessarily being binary at all, or even classified in terms of gender or sex. And the fourth one has come to the fore much more in recent years as a term, and that is sex characteristics. And this is really what we're born with in terms of our biological self, and it may be very diverse too. This is very much linked with the intersex friends in terms of perhaps people being born with various sex characteristics, male, female together, maybe organs of both sexes and more, different variations even. So this is very much a term that interlinks with how intersex people want to be treated.